what you were articulating in your article was that we used to investigate seriously what we propose to do with public works, determine what the benefit may be, engage with the community to find out if they understood that benefit and agreed with that benefit, and then we made a decision. And now the decision's made in a private corporation, completely out of the public eye, with no reference to the public, and they get told what's going to happen post hoc when billions of dollars are committed. And so it's a very important thing not to forget that governments used to do public engagement and now don't.
We see it everywhere now. We saw it in Barangaroo, we saw it with, we're seeing it in the Land Titles Office.
Oh yes.
In today's paper there is an announcement that they're shifting a lot of property from the railways into some corporation. And that as a possible first step to privatisation of that. Now, privatisation may or may not be a good idea, but it really is an important idea which ought to be publicly discussed, in my view.
Of course.
I think the quality of public discussion is the thing that's missing in all of this. Right now, when you put Metro together with WestConnex, together with light rail, we're talking about $45 billion of funding. Now, some of that comes from the private sector, but the public pay for it through tolls. They're still taxed for the use of those assets, and those assets end up belonging to government. So they are public assets. The Metro is a public asset, the light rail is a public asset, but the level of discussion has almost evaporated. And that's the distressing thing, because if you want to prevent opposition to something, you bring people with you. And if you want to create opposition, you just start knocking everybody's houses down and tell them what they're going to get. And I think this is what the move to the PR model, as opposed to the actual consultation model, was done because it was so hard, as you well know, so hard to go through a full inquiry and actually consolidate it all, and it takes time. And the developer lobby are saying, well, we want to build stuff now. We want a shortened time frame, we want to get rid of red tape. But actually public consultation is not red tape. The approval process could be considered to be red tape, but actually bringing people with you and understanding why you're building it and what you're building can't be described as red tape.
And more than that, they have a process of consultation, in inverted commas, after they've announced what they're doing.
Well, yes, it's entirely tokenistic.
And people are rightly sceptical of that, because it appears to be window dressing.
I mean, up in your neck of the woods, one of the more fascinating things I find is the new hospital, and the roadworks for the new hospital are actually more expensive than the hospital. So the new Manly, not Manly, what's that hospital called?
I'm not over that side.
Oh, you're not over that side, okay. But up on the northern beaches. French's Forest, yeah. So the new hospital, the roadworks are more expensive than the hospital. And you have to wonder, do we need such extensive roadworks? Who's making the decision? Is it engineers wanting to build things because they can? Or is it governments representing the public working out what's the best value for the dollars invested?
There's also very big contracts involved, so there are very big vested interests in the building of roads, and so that's the reason why roads have never been integrated properly with land use, because they're two powerful ways of distributing rights to people, the rights to develop property and to make profit from that, and the rights to do endless contracts of construction of roads.
And toll roads are sort of a mythical instrument in government, because in Treasury they believe they're getting infrastructure for nothing.
Oh yes.
But in fact they're not, because the cost to the public, the externalised cost of those roads is massive. So every connecting road, that comes out of the public purse. The cost of getting people on and off comes out of the public purse. The lost money in the economy that goes into tolls, so tolls till 2060 at 4% of the average income of people from the western suburbs, means they can't afford other services, they can't afford to buy things, small businesses suffer. But it's still considered to be free and to have no impact. And it's an economic lie rather than an actual financial fact.
So what we said in this proposition was that WestConnex will not solve Sydney's congestion. There's no way that would happen. Move from point A to point B, and there'll be yet another demand to build more motorways to move further on. Clearly, there's some advantage to building a second airport in Western Sydney and not having a total concentration on Kingsford Smith.
Yeah, massive roads.
It makes obvious sense to move the containers out of Port Botany by freight rail to intermodal transfer on the periphery.
Which is what I recommended.
Yes.
And it's an interesting story about how that was derailed, if I could say.
Oh, that's it. Oh, yes, okay.
Yes. Anyway, because I had the various parties come before me. I'd done a deal of industrial law before in my practice as a barrister, and I wasn't about to recommend something which was industrially naive. And I had to balance the interests, which were all opposed to each other, of three separate unions: the waterside workers, storemen and packers, and the transport workers. And anyway, we had public hearings, and ultimately it appeared that the movement of containers at this point was unstoppable. The Premier supported it and had publicly supported it, Neville Wran. Secondly, in the inquiry that I conducted, each of the 9 local councils surrounding the port had spoken with one voice, and they all supported it. Environmental group that they established likewise came with the same recommendation. And the Civilising inquiry into the establishment of container terminals on Port Botany, which preceded mine, was also made a recommendation that as many containers as possible be sent by rail. So everyone approached my public hearings with the view that this was going to happen. It didn't make any difference really to the transport workers, because they pick up the container either at the depot in the western suburbs or at the port, and they get more money like a taxi driver from the flagfall and short journeys than from the long journey. So I had on transcript an endorsement of the scheme which we recommended, which was fundamentally dividing Sydney into 2 zones and sending them by rail to the outer western zone. I had an endorsement from Harry Quinn, who was the Secretary of the Transport Workers Union. He said he had no particular objection to that. Anyway, I then went to a meeting of a committee called Transac, and I was invited there. I was told in advance that Harry Quinn would be there, and I said, and when I arrived, the Under-Secretary of the Department of Transport said to me, "Well, David, I've looked at your report, but I have to tell you I'm against compulsion." And we then had a debate. Suddenly Harry Quinn changed his position, and then I drew his attention, Harry Quinn's attention, to what he'd said to me on transcript. Anyway, the end result was that the Cabinet actually endorsed the solution that I had proposed. So they gave approval to establishing the system. But then the transport workers somehow managed to enlist the aid of the waterside workers, and they closed down the port. And it all got too hard, and the thing never happened.
Right.
So a good idea suddenly got buried, and I don't know whether the intention was to foment industrial trouble, but it may not have been. But that was the result.
So we come back to today,
Yes.
and we're still trying to duplicate the freight line out of the port to increase the amount of freight by rail.
Yeah.
But we're also building a new motorway. And the odd thing about the new motorway is it increases the distance overland trucks have to travel through built-up areas to get them away from the port. Right. So it actually makes it worse. It makes the conditions worse, it slows down the trucks, it makes it more difficult for them, and of course it increases their cost. So people again still aren't thinking through the logic chain and what the overall benefit is. They're thinking through what can they get away with. The most amazing thing I think about the whole of this WestConnex proposal, it originated as a truck tunnel from Marrickville to the western suburbs to get containers out, and then when it was designed as a $17 billion road, it did not have a connection to the port. Missed it by just 7 kilometres.
Oh, yes.
And so there's this rather, when you talked about how things get deviated by sectional interests, that's not where the money was. The money is in what we call retail. It's in the private car use, which is 60% of all users of this motorway. So, and when you put private cars in a motorway, they have to go somewhere. So you have to have many more entrances and exits, many more portals, which are very expensive. So then you need more cars to fund the new portals that you're building. And so it becomes this self-perpetuating exercise that can never actually end. By the time they've encircled the whole of Australia with a tunnel, they may be satisfied.
All right. Well, you know.
Oh yes, we could tunnel to New Zealand, you're right.
It's what, you know, James Cheif, the great activist in New York City, said back in the 60s, that building city expressways is an addictive drug.
Yes. Yeah, and it's chasing congestion. You just chase congestion to a new point. Every time you have an exit or an entrance to a motorway, you actually create more congestion. So there's another problem to solve, and that is never less than $100 million, and quite often more like $500 million to solve that particular issue. And so I don't know where you end, and having a city right smack in the middle, which can't receive any more traffic, just makes it even more ridiculous. They've decreased traffic in the centre of Sydney by 7% over the past 18 months. The state government's worked very hard using demand management because of construction to reduce the number of vehicles in the city.
Oh, yes.
And then they're building the $17 billion motorway that dumps 30,000 more people a day into the city. And so who is talking to who? Where is the decision point?
Very good question, but at the same time, there's all this technological changes taking place. So people are connecting directly, so we'll have the sort of Tinder factor, and people are connecting up for all sorts of reasons. And so we've got millions of empty passenger seats in the cars on the streets, you know, maybe 5 million a day. And if we just got more car sharing, we wouldn't need the motorways to begin with. And that's what's happening in other cities, that the actual car usage is dropping. We've reached the peak car use at the beginning of the 21st century.
Car use hasn't increased in Sydney since 2010 in the city. It's actually declined and started declining again. So we're building we've built something that was for trucks. We've had to put cars in it to make money out of it, and then we're trying to feed a market that doesn't exist.
That's right. Yes.
And so you have to create more demand. And you create more demand by going where there's not public transport. So you go to the northern beaches, why not put the public transport to the northern beaches rather than put a new motorway to the northern beaches, which is another $20 billion tunnelling project. And then when you get to the northern beaches, what happens at the exit? Oh, there's a congestion point.
Yes.
Could you speak briefly about the Weirick Expressway investigation that you did? Because that's particularly relevant right now with the Northern Beaches link.
Yeah. Well, the Kyeemagh Road inquiry, I think, was quite difficult in the sense that, it was complex, and ultimately it culminated in a 4-volume report. I still can't believe that I was naive enough to write a 4-volume report, but I did. I was 35 when I was appointed. But when I was appointed to the Kyeemagh Road inquiry, I assumed that I would end up recommending a road. But in the course of it, partly through the instruction of Professor Ross Blunden, and the education he provided, but others as well, and an article I remember particularly by Ken Dobinson about Miami and so on, I really started to have misgivings in the end, and then I devised this system which was going to be partly sending the containers by rail and then not having a road. So, and the economic return on the road at that time was low. So that was, I recommended against that. I then came to Weirick, and Weirick seemed to me a very simple inquiry because it wasn't about traffic at all. It was acknowledged by both sides that the congestion would be the same both before and after the construction of the road. In other words, present day levels, because the end result would be, and no one contested this, that once you provided accessibility to the Weirick Peninsula, then inevitably there would be tremendous pressure to develop Weirick, and both sides, both that is those who oppose and those who are in favour of the freeway, estimated that at least 80,000 people would be living in Weirick, and some of them, of course, driving. So the whole issue was, a land use issue. They didn't want to use this for a road in the foreseeable future, that is the next 20 odd years, should the corridor be preserved. And it seemed to me that it would be so destructive of the environment of Castle Crag and Middle Harbour that they should never build such a road. I left open the possibility that there could be a tunnel at some point, but there shouldn't be a surface freeway. But the real issue, which I think the people of Weirick and indeed the people of Sydney should be addressing, is whether or not it is a good idea to develop the land in Weirick. Weirick is a unique and beautiful asset, and it is a good idea to develop some of the land, but it may be that it has other and better uses, but certainly the people should have a say in what they see as the future, especially if they're told that the future, if there is development, will involve traffic at present day levels, and therefore in terms of congestion, which is the thing that they suppose that they pretend to be addressing, is not going to alter.
When the 2015 election happened, there was a ReachTel survey at the time that asked people what they thought WestConnex was. And only 20% of people were able to correctly identify it as a road project. 30-40% thought it was a combination of road and rail, and then another certain 20% thought that it was just a rail project. So you're talking about the public not being asked and consulted and involved in the discussion. Is there just straight up misinformation or obfuscation that causes the public to be completely misled, in particular about WestConnex?
I don't think it's deliberately misleading people so much as just not talking about it a whole lot to other than the people you think who are going to support it. So if you look at the detail of public feedback, people in the West think they're getting something. And so that's where the misleading comes in when you talk about the direct benefits to sectors of people. So in the business case, it talks about you can save 40 minutes on your travel time. And it is true that if you travel at midnight on a Sunday and avoid all the traffic lights, you can save 40 minutes. But on average, people will save 5 minutes. And in fact, there's a great chunk of people, more than 30%, who in the modelling would save less than 3 minutes. Now, when you model, traffic modelling is a very complex thing, and it's not the most accurate thing. So you just discount savings of less than 3 minutes because you can't guarantee that they'll actually be realised. But in the business case, to justify the economics of this project, they counted everything. Every second saved equals dollars. Now, so I'm not so sure that they really even care what the public think. I think they're more interested in the justification economically to get the project up, to get the funding in, to sell it off to the private sector.
Yeah, and I think the real mischief is they want to give the appearance of being Mr. Action Man or woman or whatever. That is, inquiries take time, they cost money, and they delay decisions, and therefore they don't get the benefit, as they see it, of announcing we're doing something about this or that problem. But I think frankly, pausing and considering what you're about to do and getting the benefit of the public's view on the wisdom of what you're about to do is so important and so beneficial that they ought to rethink their approach.
I think it's very true where right now I believe there are more cities taking freeways out than building them. So right when we're looking at building the Australia's largest freeway system and Australia's biggest transport project, which is a road tunnel, other cities are spending just as much money taking them out and actually putting public transport.
Yes. I saw in San Francisco when I was visiting my daughter that the freeway which had collapsed and they didn't bother replacing it.
Correct. The same thing happened in New York down the West Side Highway as well. And so it's been proven in every major city that you just don't build motorways converging on the centre of the city. It's self-evident to everybody apart from the proponents of this monstrous scheme. We were very privileged to be able to study this in depth for a year and to come up with an alternative proposition. And I guess we're very pleased in many ways that the community has seen some hope that this project can be stopped and there's alternatives. And it goes back to the fundamental issue that you've raised, is just how you would put forward such a massive public works program without proper inquiry and consultation and bringing people with you instead of a confrontational approach, which has been absolutely traumatic for people whose homes have been demolished and neighbourhoods destroyed and parks destroyed, trees removed. And all that grief is really totally unnecessary for what will be the future of this city. And we are indeed moving into a sort of a smart city world where different forms of communication will really facilitate car sharing in a big way. And indeed, the Transurban, the big tollway operator, is already concerned about this because there simply won't be the cars in their tunnels to give them the return. And so now they're looking really, I think, at a sort of rent-seeking approach to be part of wider cost recovery of car sharing, of charging, of road charging, user charges, forgive me, throughout the area. And I suppose they would like to have the right to collect all that money.
And so if we go back to the first big public-private partnership, which was the Harbour Tunnel.
Yes.
They considered the risk of revenue so high that they sort of guarantee on the number of vehicles that will go through and compensation if that didn't occur. And it didn't occur, and we're almost 40 years in and we're paying $100 million a year to the private owner of that road in compensation. And we've been paying tens of millions of dollars a year for the entire project. So if Transurban are concerned about the future revenue on this project, what are they going to ask the government to do?
Exactly.
They're going to ask for a revenue guarantee. Yeah. And who pays for a revenue guarantee? It's not the private sector, and it's not the people using the road, it's the general taxpayer. And when that money goes out, that's schools, hospitals, and everything else that the state provides that can't be funded because we've built an asset that's not required. And one of the reasons I was very pleased to meet with David today is the approach of actually thinking has great value. And it seems silly to have to say that an approach where you thought has value. But we have a long-term transport master plan, which was published by this government, which didn't have all of the WestConnex in it, didn't have the metros in it, didn't have the Western Sydney Airport in it. And so they're redoing their long-term transport master plan to retrofit in the decisions they made ad hoc, post hoc to those reports. And that's where an inquiry makes sense. Where do you put your money? Do you put it into your public transport? Do you put it into roads? There's no one answer. Of course, there are a combination of things that must occur, but you have to work out where you put the most money and where the risk sits for the public. And that conversation is just not being had. And it requires an inquiring, independent mind who is not beholden to the minister or is not seeking a contract, who is not an employee of the minister as senior public servants are now, to have the freedom to actually listen, interpret and then make a recommendation.
It sounds like a royal commission. Considering the billions of dollars at stake, it'd have to have the power of a royal commission, wouldn't it?
Although they had no power. And it worked quite well, and I was amazed at just how much wisdom there is out there. Yes. People have thought about it and have a contribution to make.
I seriously believe that if people weren't afraid for their jobs, because WestConnex and Metro are the only two transport planning jobs in town for the next 20 years, if they were allowed to speak publicly and openly, you would find a massive opposition to how things are being done. Not that things should be done, and not that there are not solutions, which are probably more affordable, but people feel trapped by what they have to work on.
That's the whole consulting world these days. It's all constrained by commercial in confidence provisions, and the consultants can't speak out about it. And so when we went out for our normal sponsors for this exhibition, quite a few of our sponsors we've had in past years wouldn't sponsor us because of our critique of WestConnex.
Yeah, and that happens when, I can tell you, when you're investigating WestConnex and looking at things, it's very hard to find people who will speak on the record. Very easy to find people who will speak off the record.
Oh, yes.
But you can't then publish them as sources, which means you don't have a credible response. So.